I know the talk of the town right now is the last video that I made about like the botting and auto hotkey and stuff like that. I'm really glad that Blizzard has announced they're hopefully going to be investigating it and hopefully taking steps to address some of the issues. There was another topic of conversation that I thought was interesting that I was having. Let me show you guys. Okay, so this is the original post. I wanted to know what your guys' thoughts on this were. Okay, so I saw a post from Scripe. All right, this is regarding racials. People want races to be relevant only for RP reasons or outside of world content, not in competitive environments. What do you think, fellow X users? Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys a couple different points of views, and then I'm curious what your thoughts on this are. Okay, so this poll says, do you like racials matter? Do you like racials matter in dungeons/raid encounter? And most people put no. There wasn't a great sample size, so it's about 100 people. And I thought it was interesting because I feel like racials have been a really weird thing in World of Warcraft for a long time. And I even think they're a problem looking back at the game. Like right now in retail World of Warcraft, racials have a huge impact on the game for specific classes. Like Night Elf is, I think, a perfect example of something that is completely broken for Rogue and Druid. And if you're not a Night Elf, Rogue, or Druid, you're actually putting yourself at a massive disadvantage, like a crazy disadvantage. I think Night Elf in particular is good for pretty much all of the races at the moment. But even thinking about Wrath of the Lich King is massively a problem too. So even the older expansions, this has always kind of been an issue where playing classic Wrath, lots of people have actually just re-rolled off of Horde and gone human because you have to be human. Well, you don't have to, but you're putting yourself at a massive disadvantage if you're not human because the trinkets are so overpowered that anybody who wants to, participate in PvP and have like a fair competitive footing wants to play human. They want to play Alliance, which really, really sucks. So my point of view is I would love if racials were disabled. Abilities like Shadow Meld become mandatory for Rogue and Druid because of how strong they are. Definitely a loss in terms of customization, but there's always just 3 or 4 races that are outright overpowered in comparison to the others. And let me look at this. Quinn replied. So I had a little bit of a back and forth with Quinn. I have no issues with Quinn, and I for the purposes of an open discourse, I actually like when people disagree with me. Like I don't think that I know everything, so having a different point of view I think is good. So he kind of sarcastically said, disable core RPG mechanics to appease the 1%. IMO, they should just balance them better. And I agree. It would be great if racials were balanced, but if we go back to even expansion, like we go back to the Burning Crusade, we go back to Wrath of the Lich King, the racials are not balanced. So I said, ideally, yeah, there'd be balance. Would love that, but we've missed the mark for 16 years. I also disagree it's to appease the 1%. Metagaming is very real, and there are a lot of players who would rather play what's best over what they like. So I think it's a little disingenuous to be like, oh, this is just a 1% problem, because I feel like people don't want to lose because of their racial. So if you're a rogue or a druid, just as in a specific example, you're going to want to play Night Elf because you have a way better chance of winning. Why would you purposefully disadvantage yourself? Okay, so he actually wrote out a big response after this, so we'll read it out. He said, metagamers try to ruin every game, smiley face. All you can do is let them metagame. IMO, the ideal design is each race is OP in certain situations. So you can feel your unique race, class, spec, gear really shine sometimes. If you keep removing things that make a character different from others, the game gets more and more homogenous, which is fundamentally anti-RPG. And at that point, go play another game or log into Attorney Realm. If the metagamers had it their way, all gear would be the same. There would be no racials and no crazy items or trinkets. You know what? Swapping to OP meta classes is too much of a hassle, so let's delete all classes and have melee, range, tank, and healer. So yeah, I think it's like, yeah. All right, let's continue to read. You have to draw the line in the sand somewhere, and honestly, my line has already been crossed way back after they ruined PvP gearing in Dragonflight, and the fact that people are openly advocating to remove racials blows my mind. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So I would say a few things about this. This was my response. I said, I think you can have low impact ratios that are still fun, but aren't totally broken. So that would be ideal to me. Like, none of the ratios are broken. Like, I don't think the ratio should be, oh, they're OP in certain situations. What I would say is that I would rather the ratios be low impact. Like, they could still exist. And then I said, currently that isn't the case. It isn't fun to lose because you're not a night elf, orc, or dwarf. I'd argue being able to pick the race you want is important for an RPG too. And I think that's like, it's like kind of it's the opposite of what he's saying in a way. Like, he's saying he wants racials to be super strong, so in the RPG you really feel being that race. But I feel like on the flip side, you could say also, if racials are super strong, you feel obligated to pick one that maybe you don't want, you know? So if they are not as broken in a role-playing game, you might be able to, play the one that you actually like more, which to me, I think would be awesome. I said also we fundamentally disagree about gearing, which is totally fine. I love the way gearing works in Dragonflight. Definitely has some problems, but overall, I think it's way better to me than, say, Wrath of the Lich King. So I think this is Quinn's position. Quinn's position, and this is something he got really upset about. Well, I shouldn't say upset, but he was very vocal about, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what I think Quinn's position is, from what I can remember, is he thinks that gear, there should be big differences in gear. Like, he didn't like that you could just go and buy honor gear and it was really high item level. I think he prefers the game when you can get massive advantages with your gear. If you put in like a lot of work and you're grinding and you're doing all the content, he thinks that you should have massive advantages over other players in terms of gear. And I personally completely disagree with that. I think that in a competitive game, I would rather it be on an even footing and the barrier to entry would be lower. So I think him and I just completely disagree on that, and that's totally fine. But it is interesting to hear, a little bit of a different perspective. And I think there are people that share the same perspective as Quinn. And admittedly, I do think that there are problems with the way gearing works in Dragonflight, right? Like, I'll give you a few examples. A few examples of like the problems that Dragonflight gearing has is how easy it is to make alts, right? Like, people can have 3, 4 mages, 4, 5 elemental shamans that they're just constantly queuing on, and it's actually something that hurts the inflation of the ladder. I was talking to my partners, my arena partners, with this yesterday. It's just really interesting to see that the top of the ladder doesn't queue. So you have all this inflation. Like, one of the things that's going on right now is you have all this inflation building up on every character, right? But the people that are the highest rated feel no incentive to queue. They're already safe and snuggly in their little rank 1 spot. So what they do is they make an alt and they play on their low rating alt, and it kind of like perpetually keeps rating and inflation low. And what ends up happening is at the end of the season, when people start passing the rank 1 players, like, you slowly start creeping into that range, then everybody queues. And what happens then is you have this massive explosion of MMR. And that's because one of the reasons, it's because people can make so many of the same characters and play the same comps. So you see like Ret Warrior, Druid players have 5 teams or whatever. So I think the top of the ladder needs like a little bit of a decay. Like, there just needs to be an incentive to be queuing. You know what I mean? It's unfortunate that people get really high rated, and then instead of continuing to play, they just make a new character, and that rating just piles up at the end until everybody has to queue. And that's why it feels pointless to queue until the last couple of weeks of the season, So that's one of the problems with the gearing system, is just being able to do that. Another problem people would say is that the gearing in Dragonflight is too easy, and that maybe causes a problem with alts, like being able to like Flavor of the Month reroll. You know what I mean? Like the famous Ret patch when everybody in the game turned into a Ret paladin overnight, But I would rather, like, my personal opinion is I would rather play a game where if something's broken, everybody can play it and then it gets addressed, rather than, it be completely impossible to play what's OP, and only people that have just randomly invested into it get to just abuse it, and it's really unfun personally. But anyways, back to the racial issue. One more thing I want to say about gearing. Wrath of the Lich King is awful. So I like Wrath. There's good things about it, but the gearing system is terrible, and if you want to play Wrath and catch up on gear at this point, you can't. Like, it is not possible. Like, if you wanted to log on Wrath of the Lich King and actually get full gear for the end of the season, it's impossible. You have to invest throughout the entire season, which some people think is good, but I personally don't. Like, I think when you have such a high barrier to entry for gearing, and it takes months and months and months and months of playing to just be able to get your gear, I don't like that personally. That's my own personal opinion. Some people like it. I'd rather the game be on an even playing field, and I certainly don't like that. I feel like I have to play certain races. So I'm actually I have the complete opposite opinion of Quinn on a lot of these issues, but it's fine because I know there's a lot of people that share the same opinion as Quinn, and I respect his opinion. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have, because I think the way it is currently, and I think this is a little bit on Blizzard, is there's just certain ratios that are OP, and they're blatantly OP, and they take a very long time for them to nerf. So, you know what I mean? There's certain ratios that are just obviously way better than the others. That, yeah, sure, I'll link this thread for you. You guys can check it out. But I'm curious what you guys think about that. Let's see what some of you have to say. They need to separate PvE and PvP completely. It's been an ongoing problem since the old days of WoW. Yeah, but then it's like for every action you take, there's a consequence, right? So one of the consequences of completely separating Mythic Plus, completely separating raiding, and completely separating PvP is that you hurt the overall activity in all of them. If you don't need to raid to get your best gear in Arena and Mythic Plus, then people aren't going to raid. If you don't need to do PvP to get your trinket, then to do the most damage in Mythic Plus, then people aren't going to do PvP. There are arguments I've heard that having crossover is good. Personally, I don't like having to raid, and I don't like having to do Mythic Plus, so it's fine. But there are consequences, There are consequences. Turn off racials in PvP. You could do that too, but people will argue that they want to have like that kind of customization and flexibility. But on the flip side, you can go too far, right? Like a good example, let me give you a good example. Okay, so in Shadowlands, we had the ability to customize our own characters. We had our racials, we had our class. Within our class, we had our spec. Within our spec, we had our talents, and within our character, we could choose a covenant. So it's like layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of customization that becomes an absolute nightmare for balancing issues too, right? Like it ends up being too much, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like I don't, yeah. What about making the racials PvP talents instead? I don't like that. I've heard that. But I don't like the idea that like every single game, like imagine every single game. This is something that I think about. Like imagine I'm on my my assassination rogue, and 100% of the games I play, people are stone form. Like that seems stupid. You know what I mean? Or like 100% of the game, a healer chooses to be a gnome. Exactly, like Knight said. I think that just compounds the imbalances of racials when everyone is just going to be picking everything as like an instant counter. What if they remove all races except Mecha Gnome? I think that's a great option. Goblin and Mecha Gnome should be the only races that you can pick and play. But yeah, anyways, I thought it was an interesting topic, and like I said, I totally respect Quinn's opinion. I just have a different look than he does. Woodman says, "Ugh, we're still talking about racial talents in competitive play. This has been an issue for so long. Maybe Blizzard will finally fold." No. It'd be cool if you could pick a racial just like any other talent. That's what Azael says. I bet I could convince Azael otherwise though. Maybe not. Maybe he could convince me. But I just think like having, if you're a warlock and every healer you fight is an undead, like I think it's too much.